these are things that Carr said. We were growing in spurts. Okay, before we went live, I was correcting what Carr's intro. He said Stacker News is growing exponentially. We are not. We're growing in spurts. Occasionally, it's just really flat. So that's worth knowing. Carr also said we're going to be the next Reddit. I think what's more likely is I have destroyed my life only for Stacker News to fail. And I'm exaggerating for a dramatic effect, but I like to balance out overly optimistic things. This is supposed to be about a workshop on MVPs, but it won't be a workshop. Maybe you could do this as an MVP workshop, in the sense where the minimum viable workshop is a person just showing up for it. But the byline of minimum viable products is you release something once it's valuable to anyone on Earth, and like in any to anyone, and and even even if they have to go through a lot of pain to use it and get the value, you should ship it. Is my point of view on that. Something I've noticed with founders is they will wait too long before launching, and I think the thought is that they can get it closer to perfect. I think the main error there is that before something is launched, you actually don't know what's perfect. You have no idea what's perfect, unless you're building something that's an exact clone of something that already exists, in which case you shouldn't be building it at all. And so to determine what's perfect, you need to get feedback and interact with the market, and the market will tell you how close you are to perfect, and that'll inform you as you go. In Bitcoin specifically, people will say things like, well, I'm working with money, so I can't really do an MVP. It actually does need to be perfect beforehand. I think that's a lie that's specific to Bitcoin, which is nice. It's better than a more generic lie. But in the case of even if you're working with Bitcoin protocol stuff, you can if you're on base layer, you can ship something that only works on testnet. That is an MVP that has maybe has one API call that might be valuable to someone. You should ship that. I think that's mostly it for MVPs. I think if you're a little further along with your product and you've already shipped it and you've gotten some feedback on it, and you usually develop an intuition specific around your product, such that you have a better idea of what the feature will look like in the future. And so your features maybe take your MVP. Getting to the point where you actually ship a feature might be a little longer, because you know it will happen when you ship the minimum viable version of it, and maybe you end up with like a medium viable thing later on in your development, and your users have expectations that are higher, but you understand your users really well, so you can afford to invest a little more time. But in general, I think you should just ship something. And if you're not shipping, one of the best signs when you're at a company and that you're doing something new is when you need to go through this minimum viable shipping thing again. We launched territories, which are like a subreddit thing, and we had to do that. We had to ship that in a minimum viable way, because I could have made a bunch of assumptions about what people actually wanted with them, but I really had no idea. And so the more you find yourself forced to do this minimum viable product or feature thing, it's a sign you're innovating more, in my opinion. And I think that's really most of what I have to say that's in my head that occurs to me when I'm standing right here. But if anyone has a question, yes, Scoresby.
I mean, to me, it seems obvious now that Stacker News is awesome. Did you talk to a lot of people before you yes, I want to be able to zap, or yes, I want to use lightning to curate.
No.
It was in your head, you built it, and then discovered it.
Well,
That's awesome.
that's the thing. That's the thing. It's not. I don't know how early you were on Stacker News, but when it first started, it was really. It was basically Hacker News. I knew, so I didn't have to imagine what was perfect with that, because I had an example in the world of something that people really liked, and so it was close to what Hacker News was, and then it had a little bit of Bitcoin stuff in it, and that's where I had no idea what was actually viable, and so I did the minimum amount. Which was, one sat to post, one sat to comment, and then you could zap posts. You could also boost posts. There were a lot of things that I went a little beyond an MVP to start, and we ended up walking back because really, like, to the point I didn't know what would work or not. But a lot of what Stacker News is now is through a series of iterations on that initial minimum viable product. And it looks like a fully fleshed out idea. I get people who come to me and assume that I have like a grand theory around it. And I really don't. I had an initial, the faintest of ideas that ended up emerging through an interaction of me doing a minimum viable product and then getting feedback and listening very intently to it. And that's where we are now. Another thing that was in the early version was like there were votes and sats, and votes were paid, but they were broken up into two fields. And then we learned to that people might want that simplified. Trying to think of some other things that were.
Votes and sets?
Yeah.
Where did you put the votes at?
It would be in the little metadata, like underneath. It would be like here.
Instead of sats, just because you wanted to grab other people, or what?
No, I wanted to demonstrate how many votes contributed to an item and its ranking. But people found that, it was just a bunch of extra. It's like, what's a vote? What's a sat? How do I know what the difference is?
You know what would be cool? I know you're not going to do this, but it would be cool to see views.
Oh, views. Yeah, people have asked.
Yeah.
I know people like that on Twitter. I personally don't, but
Because you're not doing marketing stuff, but views is, because you want to know what works, but I guess that would kind of game the system.
no, I don't think it would game it, but it would. I think it's. I don't know. I don't think I want people to optimize for views. I think the person that's optimizing for views is maybe not the person I want to serve so much, maybe. But yeah, I'm not against any idea, as I said, I have no idea what the right thing to do is in certainty.
You were saying yesterday, the rock thing. You were saying like you don't have intuition, but you have instinct because it's like a rocking shoe or something.
Yeah, we were talking about that on the podcast yesterday, but I think it's how it's just a metaphor for intuition. Like you're not in direct contact. Like if you have a rock in your shoe or something in your shoe, even just like the smallest little thing, the smallest rock, you're not in direct contact with the rock. It is like through your sock, you can feel it there, but it's there. And I think that's largely what happens is you're kind of at best you can barely sense what is real in as far as like things that will work in a market and what will happen in the future. I know Ted has a better way to determine this without actually making skin contact with the rock, and can do that better. But as far as like a person without such methodology, you can it's mostly intuition around stuff, and it's like you can start with a few principles. Like no one has explored Bitcoin, like a deep Bitcoin thing on a website before, and so I would guess there are really interesting things there that are completely undiscovered and might be really cool. And that's that's like something that's basically the extent of what I understood. I had developed a little bit of understanding of products and knowing that if you want to do something new, you want to introduce a new product to the market, you should be somewhat confident that you might be exploring an area of potential products that could exist that haven't been explored yet. And like one of my favorite examples is Kevin Systrom's Instagram, where he said for him what it was the camera on the phone. That was brand new to have a great camera on the phone, and then he's like, I'm going to build a product like around that, and he discovered what I think would have happened regardless. And so that's like one. So they're like these little things that you can do to guide to make better decisions, but other than that, you just kind of ship what is minimally viable about that thing that you don't think exists and might exist in the future, and then iterate, I think. For me, I was asked, how do you go about gathering feedback? It can be tricky. Fortunately, for something like Stacker News, it's a social site, so I get probably like 10 feature requests a day. And also not only feature requests, bug reports, support requests. Something nice about building a social product is that feedback mechanism is baked in. I built products in the past that, like one product, for example, purely operated on SSH keys, and there was no email login. I had no way of contacting my users, and that really limited my feedback mechanism. So I think it's something you want to make sure is present when you launch the MVP. I would say it's almost like more important than anything else in your MVP is thinking about how you might be gathering feedback on the product. And ideally, there's really some channel. Like an interesting example is Midjourney. They could have built a website where you put prompts in and it gives you images, but instead they built it into Discord. And what that allowed them to do is interact with everyone who was using their product in a way that most people are familiar with. And in addition to like all of the people who are using their product able to see other people using their product and kind of help each other. And so it's kind of an interesting example. I don't know if it answers the question exactly, but I think it's critical to make sure it's present. I think in the case of Stacker News, it was mostly just a happy coincidence that I didn't have to think explicitly about that. Yeah. Like I couldn't help that that would exist. Yeah.
So I've got a question about education. I created an education app.
Zippy.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we're on the Top Builder program, and so the current question we're trying to answer is, how do you build a sustainable Bitcoin education business? I'm hearing from a lot of people that it's really tough. So any thoughts on that? Any recommendations?
Well, I had a conversation about a friend the other day about this specific thing who also wants to do Bitcoin education stuff. And I think a lot of people say things like it's hard, but how many people have actually given it a real hard try? I would guess fewer than 10. So so if you're using all of the like those fewer than 10 it's a very small sample size to conclude that that thing isn't going to, a Bitcoin education company isn't going to work. There are plenty of examples of education companies that are large and successful outside of Bitcoin. Yeah. So, but it requires, a lot of effort to figure out how, like, the specific market you're in and what might be financially viable. And so I think another thing that founders do, I think you need to do MVP stuff with also business models. I think it should be figuring out a business model will require as much creativity as the product. And I think people underestimate that how difficult that can be, and they really just want it to show up, or they want to strap on something that exists in other products and has worked in other products when you might be doing something completely different. But you can iterate and figure that out. We didn't know, when I started Stacker News, I didn't know how we might have a business model. We still might not have a business model, but eventually it was like, oh, we might be able to package up and sell what we kind of already have as a service. And so these territories are paid. That's basically like a functioning Stacker News that's sort of encapsulated. And that might be a viable business path. And it might be a very, if the tagline we use is like Shopify for virtual economies. And so if we can actually execute on that, that's pretty good. But we didn't know that to begin with. And, we thought we had ideas around, okay, maybe posting costs will be good enough and people will be boosting stuff enough, and maybe we'll be able to shave enough fees off on things, and maybe that'll be enough to sustain the business. But it became clear that really didn't work. So as far as education specifically, So I don't think I have anything specific for education, except I think there can be a product there. It's just I don't know exactly what it is. Yeah, exactly. Just keep trying, and don't overthink it. Try to get it in people's hands, and work very closely with them. And feedback forever. Another thing that I would suggest for a very early product is be the puppet of your users. I will let my users completely push me around, as much as I possibly can handle, and that also in a way that invites them to give you feedback. If they feel like they can really have an influence and they don't have to do the work, you will for them. They will continue to try to influence you, which is exactly what you want.
Is this on? Okay, cool. So we got one from Eric Alvarez inside the chat. He says, question for Keyan, for developing MVPs, do you have a recommended time frame, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, etc.?
I like 6 weeks. I think it should be, I think if you can't deliver an MVP in 6 weeks, you don't have product founder fit. You should be able to deliver it fast, at least the MVP. I'm not saying it has to be fancy. At whatever stage it can be, such that you can get feedback and people can explore your idea. It should be 6 weeks. Else you're maybe overshooting in terms of what you're building, and it's not actually minimally viable.
Great answer. Next one is from Keith. He's building Branta. He says, Keyan, who are your favorite designers, software or otherwise? Alternatively, what are some of your favorite designs, watches, architecture, cars, etc.?
For design specifically,
I think he's just trying to find out what your aesthetic is. What do you like as far as aesthetics?
That's a hard question. I think specifically for consumer products, I think it's worth looking at a lot of graphic artists, illustrators, but I don't have anyone specifically that I think I would say I look up to or model after.
What I do is I just go straight to Nike for the seasonal colors.
Interesting.
What's the colors of this?
Carr said he goes to Nike to pick up seasonal colors. Is it all black this season at Nike?
For me.
I know, I'm just messing with you. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That's doing stuff like that seems smart, but I think specifically for minimum viable products, design, unless your product is very design forward, you might not. You probably don't want to over-index on design. Yeah.
How do you prioritize all the feedback that you get? And now you get a hell of a lot of feedback apparently, but how do you prioritize? You kind of mentioned one, you want to get something in their hands basically within 6 weeks, but even before, no one knew who the hell Stacker News was, like even back then, how did you prioritize something from among the feedback you were getting? Hey, this is something that, one or two people gave me feedback. Okay, this might scale up and people might give a damn.
It's a great question. So I think it's mostly a function of being a very active user yourself. And for me, at least, I know Ted will also have his own point of view on this. But if it's when it's their feedback combined with my own experience, where those overlap is two independent validation points that thing might be the right thing to do. And again, with that, and then you maybe prioritize on that basis. Again, there's some intuition. I feel the rock in my shoe that might also be the right thing. But then you ship that thing in a minimum viable way, and then you repeat the process with that specific feature. And it's like you have all these branching experiments of minimum viable products where you're getting feedback on each independent branch. And then similarly, just iterating on all of them. Like we shipped a feature for like post pinning the other day, and we got a bunch of feedback on it, and the ways that it's not viable are the only other engineer that we have wanted to act very fast on the feedback. But I don't, I think it wasn't clear to me what the right way to go. So we're waiting to get more feedback and see how people are using it before we step in and prioritize those changes relative to other things. But I think for us, it's mostly a function of us being very active users, perhaps the most active users, and then considering that alongside the feedback, and where that also, another independent validation point is it like lines up with some of our earlier guesses, maybe some of the some of the interpretations of things other people have said in a less explicit way about the product. So there's a lot there that isn't unfortunately isn't much I can externalize to share, but it is these are all like models I think that get built up in your mind as you go through the process.
So second kind of unrelated question is, in Bitcoin, only less than 1% of people, have
Holders.
any Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And then probably a percentage of them, are more than just hodlers basically, and, are active basically. So, does that alter your MVP strategy at all?
I think that might alter whether you want your product to be dependent on Bitcoin in such a way that it provides no value other than having Bitcoin in it. And that is something I recommend to all founders, is that if Bitcoin's price is flat or goes down, it doesn't matter. Your product is independently valuable of Bitcoin. In the case of something like Stacker News, regardless of while some of the dynamics might change if the price is low, fundamentally we're still benefiting from Bitcoin in a way that someone who doesn't value Bitcoin and uses Stacker News would get benefit from Stacker News. And that's how I talk to a lot of founders who part of their VC pitch is, well, Bitcoin is going to explode and our product has Bitcoin in it. So we're going to explode. But it's just not, I don't think that's true. So Yeah.
Question about funding. Is Stacker News bootstrapped? Did you guys raise money? And generally, what are your thoughts on when the right time to raise would be?
I think whenever you think you could use the money might be the right time. Whenever you think it would actually benefit you and the company, it's, there's no harm in asking early. When you feel that, and you might feel like it's maybe not the right time, getting to know the VCs, talking to them, learning about them, modeling the way they think about things and what they might be interested in is all good things to do. For Stacker News, I started it never expecting to get venture funding. I just kind of started it for fun, having failed at a bunch of other bootstrap startups before. I had one bootstrap startup that still runs, that has moderate success. But it was about 6 months in, I realized that it was I saw a lot that I could do and wanted to do with the product. And people started asking me if I wanted to raise money, and then I did it. What else? You asked another question in there.
Just your opinion generally on raising.
Oh, right. So I think it can go. I've seen it go good and I've seen it go bad. And you can be the kind of founder who focuses on raising only and not product. I would say if you're doing it right, you're 90% focused on product, and the fundraising part is just a small part of what you're doing, especially at an early stage. Maybe later it becomes more of a thing if you have a huge burn and you need to do it or whatever. But that's what I do. Stacker News is not bootstrap. Stacker News is venture funded. We raised a very modest pre-seed round, even though I had already shipped a product and had users. 300K. It's all public. My decks are public. Investors are public. It's all on Stacker News. But it was 300K at in a $6 million post money safe, and then I raised a seed round for 1.25 million. I think it was like 8 months later. I raised 1.25 million at a $25 million valuation, also in post money safes. My approach to this is to be very conservative with raising money, and typically people will sell 10 to 20% of their company each round. The last two raises I sold 5%. There are hazards of having too much money, especially when you're trying to figure out your product. You can go really, absent stuff that Ted will tell you about how to determine what your product should do. You can go. The money is rocket fuel, and so if your rocket is oriented in the wrong direction, you will end up in the wrong place. And so you really just want, you want enough money to make fine adjustments to your orientation and move a little bit, and so that you can check to make sure you're on the right course. There's also, not having a bunch of money also makes you make better decisions, in my opinion. The constraint on your focus is very good. It causes you to really think about your priorities, because you have to cut everything below the priority line when you don't have the money to do everything.
You got one more question from John. He's doing clams. What kind of metrics should a team be tracking to determine success of an MVP?
What kind of?
Yeah, John said from clams, what kind of metrics should a team be tracking to determine success of an MVP? It's hard to say.
It's specific to every product. So like the metric that we primarily tracked at Stacker News is spenders. I'm interested in seeing how many people are spending money on a regular basis. Right now we have, I think it's like 1,500 people spending a month. Daily, it's like 400, and my current like goal is to get it to 1,000 people a day spending money. I just think that is like the clearest sign that someone is getting value as they're spending money. So that's kind of the way I backed into that being the important thing. We track a variety of metrics at a very early stage with an MVP. It's more or less are people using it? Like, can I continue to iterate and get into a feedback loop with it? This is my metric. I'm not saying this is my way I think about it, not the way that I recommend other people. Maybe you can figure out a better way to measure it, but it's mostly a matter of, are people using it and you're kind of surprised by their usage, and the growth is somewhat organic. It's maybe not a lot of growth, but it isn't. It's stable in an organic way, and maybe somewhat increasing at a very early stage. Like, people are very, you're talking to people, they're very excited, maybe not completely happy, but it's hard to say. Like, I think that might be more of like somewhat of an intuition thing. Fully. Ted.
Keyan, I'm just curious, like when you were first starting, so you said you were playing around with a couple other startups, and then you identified, not Stacker News, the Y Combinator, Hacker News. Mm-hmm. Why did you pick Hacker News as something that you wanted to emulate? Like, what was going into that before you actually pulled the trigger and started?
No. I was a user, and so I was a user of Hacker News, and they are historically very like anti-crypto. And so I was in California, isolated from Bitcoiners, and I wanted to find Bitcoiners online in a way where we could have like thoughtful discussions that were like the ones that I would read on Hacker News, but where on Hacker News, they weren't actually about Bitcoin, they were about other technical things. And I'd moved on technically from wanting just generic technical discussions or things about tooling or whatever, and had wanted Bitcoin discussions and Bitcoin community when I was in California. And then I moved here and got Bitcoin community. And it was like, okay, so this thing is actually present and, is a real thing, and it actually exists, but it just doesn't exist online yet. And so that was the kind of idea, was make a Hacker News for Bitcoin stuff. And, being still, even though I had moved to Texas, still having empathy for myself where I wasn't in a Bitcoin community locally, and wanting to find that wanting to have that online. And that was kind of the thing. And the other maybe thing that was, where I felt like I might have an advantage in working on something like this, was I had done a bunch of research on commons management for a prior startup that I had done, and I knew on Hacker News there were commons management issues, because the feed on social sites like Hacker News are a commons. Everyone is sharing the front page. They're all sharing the recent tab. And it's subject to all kinds of abuse. And Ryan Gentry at a BitDevs had talked about Sphinx Chat, which had just launched, and that they were using Lightning payments to deal with spam, which spam plagues commons. And so I just kind of connected the dots there, and so there was like maybe like three things that kind of crested in me. Yeah.
I have a question for you, and I never asked you this before, so this is kind of, and I just didn't really start thinking about it until I was looking at that dig thing the other day. Did you know that you were making obviously you knew you were making like a Hacker News clone, and then we started PlebLab. Did you know like we were doing something very similar or anti like fiat startup from San Francisco? Like, because it looks like we directly copied those guys, even though we're not even close to those guys at all. I'm just saying it just looks like the complete opposite. And I know it didn't happen by design, but the more I was thinking about it the other day, is like, do you realize that, or do you think about that? I don't think about it, but I just think that's.
I don't really think about. So a lot of Bitcoiners think in terms of like anti-fiat or fiat is, the enemy or stuff like that. I tend to not. I just don't think you stand for much if you just stand against something. I just don't. I don't. And I think we end up. I think a lot of the startups in Bitcoin look a lot like the startups in San Francisco. So I mean, we could talk a big game about. Maybe we eat more steak. Don't know. I don't know what our actual difference is with. I think that's the really powerful thing about incentives and humans and things is that they are pretty predictable. And so if you put Bitcoiners in a situation where they have a community and they have startups around them, I think you're eventually going to get, and there are VCs that exist, and the technical people and the founders that you're talking to need to connect with VCs and they need help and all I think you eventually end up with an accelerator thing. And so I think it's a bit of like parallel invention. Even in a world that had really poor communications, calculus was invented by two people at roughly the same point in time, and I just think we are way more predictable than we are not, and Bitcoiners are still people, and they still exist in the world, and so we're likely to shadow what has come before in many ways. Yeah, Scoresby.
Do you want to talk here, Scores?
So when you released when you just started Hacker News and released it, how did you go about getting users? Did you have a plan, a strategy, or was it just you're well connected here?
I knew no one when I was here, and I'm notoriously shy and keep to myself. So it wasn't. So it wasn't like I tapped into like any kind of network I had or anything. I think this speaks to like creating things at the edge of where technology is, and I think this is what Kevin Systrom found too. Is that when you're at that edge, there are other people on that edge too. They're just they're not maybe building things, but they're waiting for things to happen at the edge so that they can begin to use them and interact with them. A lot of our early users were just people who were quite bullish on Lightning very early, or present in the Lightning ecosystem and wanted to use Lightning more and tools around Lightning. And that's basically how we got our initial user base. Was I released it? I think I put it on Twitter. I made some effort to like be in people's replies on Twitter's I tried to be shameless and had trouble. But the people at the edge, some of the people on the edge had large audiences from like before that edge was established. And so like Jimmy Song, I think a week after we had launched, put us in his newsletter. And that was nice. I think I had met Ben Carmen, who runs BitDevs, and I had told him I had launched and asked him if he could maybe mention it and I could speak a little bit. I think that was mostly the extent of it, and it didn't require. There was really no active treatment of it. Yeah. But I knew there were Bitcoiners out there, and I knew I could reach them on Twitter. I knew, like, at worst case, I knew where Bitcoiners were, and that if I needed to scream somewhere, I could find somewhere I could scream and hopefully get them. That was like the only thing that I could count on. But I didn't end up having to count on that too much, I don't think.
Was it? I feel like when I started, it was you had to log in with Lightning.
No,
It was never just that.
it was never just that. It was when
It was email and Lightning.
it was when we first started. There wasn't even Lightning login. It was just GitHub, Twitter, and email. And then I think Super Testnet reached out to me and he's like, "You should do Lightning login." And then I was like, "I don't know this guy, but he's asking me for something, and I'm his puppet, and I will do what he says, and that seems interesting. And I've done auth methods that are similar before, so why don't I give that a shot?" And that's something that's kind of interesting related to the last question is. Quite a few of our users just came for little things like the Lightning log, and I think we were one of the first people to do a decent execution of it. And that's how we got, like, people were just curious. People who are also at the edge and, you maybe didn't care about the social product, maybe didn't care, but maybe they were upset about email logins or whatever, and they wanted to explore that. And so, yeah, that was how that happened. And Lightning login is not great. It's like the number one source of all of our support requests. It's very technical. It's actually more common among very technical people to have issues with Lightning login because they're constantly changing their wallets and constantly like burning devices and getting new devices. I've had some of the most experienced and competent people reach out to me about Lightning login issues, and it's incredible how it just suggests it's terrible as a thing. In some ways, in other ways, it's great. It's just it has key management issues, fundamentally. Cool. Thanks so much, guys.